going to have Abhinav, who's going to talk to us all about hypertension. To introduce, we've got as our expert, Dr. Shirish Hiremat. We're all familiar with him. He's the ex-president of CSI and has an incredible amount of interventional work. But besides the interventional, he's an excellent clinical cardiologist. And all of us have been his students in one form or the other in our lives. And of course, our second expert is Dr. Milind Gadkari. He's the chief of cardiology at KEM Hospital and at Sahyadri Hospital. We of course have our other consultants who will contribute, Parimal Lavate, Lata Patil, and others who will keep joining in along the way. And we'll of course have everybody's contributions. So Abhinav, would you like to take the discussion forward? Just a couple of housekeeping. I will all of us mute and put our videos off so that we don't use the bandwidth. But whoever wants to speak, please unmute yourself and then can speak. So, and Milind and Shirish, please do interrupt for comments whenever you feel is required. This is interactive, so it's not that you have to wait for the presentation to get over. Please stop anywhere and do put in the comments, or, and for that matter, all residents, please do feel free to ask questions to Abhinav in between whenever you feel it is you need to ask something. So it's not like a typical lecture. It's an interactive session. And all of us can, ask questions. Please unmute yourself and ask questions. And those who are, just put yourself, stop the video so that we have enough bandwidth. Okay. So
yeah, we can see you.
Continue. And Abhinav, please take the discussion forward.
Good evening, sir. My topic for today is hypertension guidelines. So we define hypertension as office systolic blood pressure values of more than 140 and diastolic values of more than 90. European Society 2018 hypertension guidelines were designed for adults who are more than 18 years. So new concepts, so they've included wider use of out-of-office blood pressure measurements with ambulatory blood pressure measurements and home-based blood pressure measurements. Lower blood pressure thresholds and treatment targets for elderly patients. Treatment should never be denied or withdrawn on the basis of age. Pill combination treatment strategy to improve BP control. Preferred use of 2-drug combination therapy for initial treatment. So classified blood pressure and definitions of grading of hypertension are: optimal BP levels are less than 120 systolic and less than 80 diastolic. Normal is 120 to 129 and diastolic is 80 to 84. High normal, they've considered 130 to 139 and diastolic 85 to 89. Grade 1 hypertension is 140 to 159, whereas diastolic is 90 to 99. Grade 2 hypertension is 160 to 179 and diastolic 100 to 109. Grade 3 hypertension is more than 180 and diastolic, for diastolic it is more than 110. Isolated systolic hypertension is more than 140 and diastolic we consider is less than 90.
So, Abhinav, just a minute. So these criteria are given only by the European Society. This is not accepted by the American Heart Association yet.
The other thing, Abhinav, I wanted to ask you is, why do they have this high normal? Does it have any kind of a significance?
No, that is what there is not. Previously, there was a term called pre-hypertension, which has been given up. That was, I think, JNC 6 or 7. MS, you can correct me, but I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. That was high normal.
I would feel many of these.
Expert, please keep your video on. Expert, please keep your video on. Yeah.
Many who are between 130 and 139 are futuristic hypertensive. I think this is what we learned many years back, and it continues to hold true. So it's just because they are less than 139, it doesn't mean that we should ignore them, but follow them more closely than somebody who has blood pressure of 125.
Are we having Indian guidelines?
There are some papers, but they're all following the American college basically. Similar guidelines are there, but because we have bigger population and the hypertension prevalence is much more in India, India is a sort of a hotbed for hypertension and its complications.
I would just like to ask one question to both of you. That suppose you've got somebody with a high cardiovascular risk as per the risk scores.
Yeah.
Then do you think that this prehypertension should be treated in that case because it may have a direct bearing on his progression of the cardiovascular disease?
Actually, if you see the Escort legacy results, which are 16 years down the line, and those who were put on antihypertensive therapy with a two-drug that too early, after 5 years, they stopped following as a part of study, but they continue to monitor these people. So this legacy effect continues. This legacy effect is true, as Sanjay would agree, for many anti-diabetics, as well as statin therapy also.
Yeah.
So it is quite important that if somebody is young, we should treat them more aggressively, more effectively. And see, typically a 35-year-old comes, he has a few readings around 140 and we say, you're okay. But that's not okay for me. I think you should look around for sort of other risk factors. It's not blood pressure alone. And this particular fellow who is 35 to 40 is going to carry this blood pressure for a longer duration. So I would probably be a little more concerned. I'm not saying I would put him on drugs, but certainly exercise, weight reduction, high fruit diet, and so on.
So it becomes a case for a aggressive lifestyle modification. And if that fails, do you think that there is a case, in particularly who've got a CV risk score of, let's say, about 20 or something, or even more than 10 for that matter, and you have given aggressive lifestyle for 3 months, and does it become a case if you're bordering around, in the pre-hypertension or the high normal range, to start them on a small dose of ACE or ARBs? Do you think there is
If it is only hypertension, then I think I would go slow, but monitoring is very important. I mean, he would at least a 25% chance that he is a futuristic hypertensive.
Do you think you'll put him on drugs?
Probably not right in the beginning, because, like we talk about statin also, once you start, it's going to be a lifetime. So probably make sure, like we have many other ways to monitor his pressure, home blood pressure monitoring, and so on. So all these would come as I guess, as we go through more slides.
Yeah, can we
carry on? Yeah.
I think carry on, Abhinav.
So blood pressure measurement, the patient should be seated comfortably in a quiet environment for about 5 minutes before measuring. 3 BP measurements should be recorded 1 to 2 minutes apart. Additional measurements only if the first 2 readings differ by more than 10. BP is recorded as the average of the last 2 BP readings. Additional measurements may be performed in patients with unstable BP values due to arrhythmias, such as in patients with atrial fibrillation. Using a standard cuff of 12 to 13 centimeter width and 35 centimeter long for most of the patients, but those who are having more than 32 centimeter circumference of their arms, for them we can use larger and smaller cuffs. The cuff should be positioned at the level of the heart, with the back and arms supported to avoid muscle contraction and isometric exercise-dependent increase in blood pressure. Measure BP in both arms at the first visit to detect possible between arm differences. Use the arm with higher value as reference. Measure BP 1 minute and 3 minutes after standing from a seated position in all patients at the first measurement to exclude orthostatic hypotension. Lying and standing BP measurements should also be considered in subsequent visits in older people. Record heart rate and use of pulse palpation to exclude arrhythmias. Out of office blood pressure measurements.
Just 1 minute.
Blood pressure measurements or
most of the time,
yes,
we are using these automated blood pressure, and they give you 3 readings.
Yes.
Typically, as you said, the first reading is high.
Yes, sir.
We should we should generally ignore it, and you would get reading 2 and reading 3, which may be more correct, or you can take an average of these.
Yeah.
Is there a case now, you're using these measurements where they do both the arms simultaneously, and that has got some bearing with the CV risk? Do you think there is a case and then you average out both the arms and you accept it? What is your take on that?
No, actually, I don't think.
Yeah, nobody's doing it basically,
Yeah.
but let us see, even theoretically, all that we are talking is some kind of osseal narrowing at the origin from the aorta. That's why one-sided blood pressure may be less and other side may be slightly high. So we expect the normal difference between right and left. Right is slightly more, up to about 10 degrees is okay, the difference. Okay, Abhinav, we can
continue.
Out of office blood pressure measurement refers to the use of home-based blood pressure measurement or ambulatory blood pressure measurement. The latter usually covers 24 hours. Home-based blood pressure measurement average of all BP readings performed with the semi-automatic validated BP monitor for at least 3 days before clinic visits. Diagnostic threshold for hypertension is at least 135 systolic and diastolic 85. Home-based blood pressure measurement is more closely related to hypertension-mediated organ damage, particularly left ventricular hypertrophy. For ambulatory blood pressure measurement provides an average of BP readings over a period of 24 hours. The diagnostic threshold for hypertension is at least 130 systolic and 80 diastolic over 24 hours. At least 135 systolic and 85 diastolic for the daytime average, and at least 120/70 for the nighttime average. Dippers are defined as if there is a nocturnal BP fall by more than 10% of the daytime average BP value. Reasons for the absence of nocturnal blood pressure dipping are sleep disturbances, obstructive sleep apnea, obesity, high salt intake, chronic kidney disease, diabetic neuropathy, and old age. So they mentioned that nighttime blood pressure is a stronger predictor of outcomes than daytime blood pressure. Night to day ratio is also significant predictor of outcome. Patients with reduced nighttime dip in blood pressure, that is less than 10% of the daytime average BP, or a night to day ratio of more than 0.9, have an increased cardiovascular risk. White coat hypertension. White coat hypertension refers to the untreated condition in which blood pressure is elevated in the office, but is normal when measured by ambulatory method or home-based method or both. Masked hypertension refers to untreated patients in whom the blood pressure is normal in the office, but is elevated when measured by home BP monitoring or ambulatory BP monitoring. Sustained hypertension is when both are abnormal. White coat effect is the difference between the higher office value and the lower out of office BP. Screening of hypertension. Hypertension is an asymptomatic condition, is best detected by structured population screening programs or opportunistic measurements of blood pressure. Alarming thing is that 50% are still unaware that they have hypertension. So we follow the screening protocol as those who are having optimal BP levels, that is less than 120/80, should repeat their blood pressure measurements at least every 5 years. And those who are having blood pressure in the normal range should repeat blood pressure measurements at least every 3 years. Those having high normal BP range should repeat their blood pressure measurements annually. And those whom we classify as hypertensives should undergo repeated visits for office blood pressure measurements, or should monitor themselves at home by home-based BP monitoring or ambulatory BP monitoring. What all investigations we need to undergo for to check for hypertension-mediated organ damage? We need a 12-lead ECG to check for left ventricular hypertrophy, a urine to albumin creatinine ratio to check for possible renal disease, blood creatinine and for renal disease. Fundoscopy we check for hypertensive retinopathy, especially in patients with grade 2 or grade 3 hypertension. Echocardiography to check for the cardiac structure and function. Carotid ultrasound to check for the presence of carotid plaque or stenosis in those who are having cerebrovascular disease or vascular disease elsewhere. Abdominal ultrasound or Doppler studies to evaluate the renal size, renal structure, and to check for the causes of underlying CKD. To evaluate abdominal aorta for evidence of aneurysmal dilatation and vascular disease. Examine adrenal glands for adenoma or pheochromocytoma renal artery Doppler studies to screen for the presence of renal vascular disease. We also check for pulse wave velocity as an index of aortic stiffness or an underlying atherosclerosis. Ankle brachial index to check for peripheral arterial disease. Cognitive function testing to check for the patients who are having cognitive impairment, and brain imaging to check for those who are having a history of cerebrovascular disease or cognitive decline.
Abhinav, just a minute. In the echo,
Yes,
you
sir.
should add diastolic dysfunction also.
Yes, sir. It is
That
in
is a very common association with all hypertensive patients.
Yes, sir.
The other thing, Milind, is if echo shows LV hypertrophy and your blood pressure readings taken in the office are consistently normal, you must go around searching for evidence of blood pressure. So you would suggest a home monitoring of blood pressure. You would do a ambulatory blood pressure monitor. So LV hypertrophy, the commonest cause is hypertension, and it's a missed hypertension. So you have to search for evidence of hypertension by checking it again and again.
Just one more point, and I'll ask the experts this. How much now do you play emphasis that, renal artery Dopplers for renal vascular hypertension is sensitive? Because I thought that renal angio is a better parameter. Because here still we carry forward the same thing every time that, renal Doppler.
Renal Doppler has a lot of limitations, basically, especially in obese patients. It is very difficult to get a good renal Doppler reading. So I think if you're really suspecting renal stenosis, CT angio is the best method.
But I mean, let's see the sort of advice for CT angio is not a very easy advice. I mean, you have to look at creatinine, you have to look at so many other things. Cost is an issue. What echo can diagnose is coarctation. It can diagnose very conveniently.
Yeah.
It can diagnose aortoarteritis, especially if the origin of the subclavian or innominate artery is narrowed. It can give you a Doppler signal. So partly aortoarteritis can be diagnosed. And the people who have scaphoid abdomen, there I think renal artery stenosis also can be picked up. But if the ultrasound report says that no evidence of renal artery stenosis, as Milind says, I wouldn't buy it completely. I mean, I would search around if I'm strongly thinking of renal hypertension.
Would you add on to the fact that suppose we do find at times, incidental findings of unilateral small kidneys? Would that sort of become an indication for you? And in presence of severe hypertension, would that sort of alert you to the fact that you need to look at renal artery stenosis in these?
This definitely needs a CT angio. Unilateral small kidney, shrunken kidney. Renal artery stenosis is the common cause, and we must rule it out. If there is no renal artery stenosis, still nephrectomy used to be sometimes considered depending upon how bad is the renal function. Because all that that particular kidney is doing is contributing to hypertension.
Well, one more just a teaching point that for the students especially, you can always look for a renal bruit clinically. That is also sometimes helpful clinically to diagnose renal artery stenosis.
But worse than ultrasound or renal Doppler. People don't anticipate carotid artery, auscultating renal is well beyond. Okay, let's go.
Okay, let's proceed, Abhinav.
So when to refer the patient with hypertension for hospital-based care? Patients in whom secondary hypertension is suspected, younger patients less than 40 years with grade 2 or more severe hypertension in whom secondary hypertension should be excluded, patients with treatment-resistant hypertension, patients with hypertension-mediated organ damage, patients with sudden onset hypertension in BP was previously normal, conditions in which the referring doctor feels more specialist evaluation is required. Genetics and hypertension.
Abhinav, what are the conditions in which you get sudden onset of hypertension?
Yeah, flash.
Would you like to elaborate on that? Or maybe anyone?
Sir, renal artery occlusion.
Binge drinking. I think that is one reason where people overshoot and come as an hypertensive emergency. So that is one thing where otherwise patient is normal, never hypertensive, but can come with acute presentation.
So
There is
anxiety.
a drug history which is very important also, because there are a lot of drugs, like in gastro we use steroids for ulcerative colitis. So drug history is very important also when you see a hypertensive patient, because you can have reversible
Yes, sir.
causes for it.
Yeah.
Licorice injection, I think,
Injection.
is
Yeah.
another reason where you get high blood pressure acutely.
Rebound hypertension is seen with centrally acting
Clonidine.
withdrawal of centrally acting drugs like clonidine, moxidine.
How much of steroids have you seen coming up with acute hypertension?
Yeah.
Anybody?
What is the question, Sanjay?
I said, have
Steroid,
you
yeah, long-term
high
steroid.
dose of steroids, which you give pulse steroids, coming with sudden onset of high, hypertension? For example, our transplant patients and all that, you get you give large amounts of steroids suddenly in these patients, and a lot of them have sudden spike in the blood pressures. Have you seen that happen?
No idea.
But in transplant patients, I think CNI is very important cause, because a lot of them are on CNI, and they are the ones which cause hypertension.
Okay.
So genetic testing should be considered in specialist conditions for which patients suspected to have rare monogenic causes of secondary hypertension, or for those with pheochromocytoma. Routine genetic testing for hypertensive patients is not recommended. Treatment of hypertension. Systolic blood pressure reduction by 10 or diastolic BP reduction by 5 is associated with significant reductions in all major cardiovascular events by 20%, all-cause mortality by 10 to 15%, coronary events by 20%, and heart failure by 40%. Another objective is to reduce the development of chronic kidney disease and deterioration of kidney function in diabetics by BP reduction.
We know at this stage, I think we must consider age a very important factor.
Yes, sir.
The systolic blood pressure is extremely important for people above 60 years.
65, yeah.
Actually, there are many who believe it's 55, but let's say 60, around 60 or 65. The systolic pressure is one which is important, while for younger ones, the organ damage correlates more with the diastolic hypertension. Though these days, we generally look only at the systolic figure. Age has something to do when we talk of organ damage, systolic and diastolic.
So for management, the patients who are classified as high normal BP should we advise them lifestyle modification and consider drug treatment in only patients who are having cerebral coronary vascular disease, especially coronary artery disease. Patients who are classified as grade 1 hypertension.
Hey, 1 minute, Abhinav. Sanjay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Suppose there is a family history of diabetes.
Yeah.
And this person, the young one, say 35-year-old,
yeah,
is having a blood pressure like 135, 139. Do you want to consider them for ACE inhibitor therapy?
So basically, the thing is now, somebody's, please mute yourself. I think somebody's speaking. So, hello. Yeah. So, diabetics now, the earlier thought process was that if somebody is got a microalbuminuria, then you should be giving them ACE inhibitors, or there is evidence of endothelial dysfunction. Now the current thought process is we do not give, earlier the microalbuminuria, you would say give ACE, ARBs, control of hypertension and glycemic control. More and more evidence has now come that we do not really give ACE inhibitors for microalbuminuria. And now they say that if you have got a macroproteinemia, then you should give them ACE inhibitors. So
no, I'm not talking of a diabetic individual. He has a family history of diabetes.
Yeah, so in family history, unless this guy's got risk of diabetes, but it should not be sort of, as a somebody speaking at the background. Somebody speaking at the background. I'm going to unmute everybody. Somebody's at the background. So I'm sorry. So if you have a family diabetes, then it doesn't become an indication to give ACE inhibitors to a young onset. unless there is a definite evidence of pre-diabetes, there is evidence of any endothelial dysfunction, or there is evidence of any sort of, microalbuminuria or something like that. But as a blanket, just because he's got a family history, you would not give them.
Okay, if he has hypertension, like say grade 1, this gentleman, he's not diabetic, but the family history, your first choice would be ACE inhibitor?
Yes, I mean, I'd say it all depends on what risk factors are you looking at. Now, suppose this guy has got, he may be, family history of hypertension, young onset. If he's obese and he's got other risk markers like obesity, dyslipidemia, all these things, and if you do a carotid intermedial thickness and you find that there is evidence of endothelial dysfunction, then there would be a case. But if he's purely normal and he's got no risk factor or a low risk and he's not even a pre-diabetic, I don't think I would put him on an ACE inhibitor.
No, he's grade 1 hypertensive. So
I would probably aggressive lifestyle modification will be the way to go. This is what my earlier question to you was also, that, would you put these patients, if they don't respond to aggressive lifestyle, then would you consider them primarily for ACE inhibitors? And we don't have that answer. Only thing that we have got is probably the SPRINT and which is that study?
SPRINT.
Accord BP study.
Accord.
Yeah, where they looked at low normal versus high normal. And they found that non-diabetics really benefit, but the diabetic patients don't benefit if you're really looking at low normal studies. So as an extension, if you say grade 1 hypertension and you're looking at moving these patients to low normalcy as per the SPRINT study, then you have a case there. But if you're in a diabetic population, we don't have any evidence to show that, intensifying control helps in any kind of a way.
Hello.
Okay.
Can I say something? Dr.
Yeah.
Agarwal?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Just in that SPRINT study you mentioned, but the participants included were all older adults. The 75 years and older, 28% of the
It was
study
mainly for systolic
75 years and
hypertension.
older.
It was mainly for systolic.
Systolic hypertension.
But we don't have any young studies at all. Young patients, we don't have enough data of that. What happens in those patients?
I cannot hear.
Sorry? Lata, you want to add something? Please go ahead.
I couldn't hear you earlier. What I was saying was the SPRINTs, you mentioned that you wouldn't put the young individual on any treatment, referring to the SPRINT trial, but I was saying that the SPRINT study participants were all 75 years and older, and participants with diabetes were not included in that study.
No, we're talking about Accord BP versus SPRINT.
SPRINT, I think, was mainly for systolic blood pressure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Systolic blood pressure.
One had a diabetic population, the other one did not have a diabetic population.
Yeah.
So the Accord BP had a diabetic because they had two arms. They had the lipid arm, they had the glycemic arm, and they had the hypertension arm. So that was done in diabetic population. The SPRINT was in a non-diabetic.
SPRINT didn't have diabetes. Yes.
Okay.
So patients who are having grade 1 hypertension, we advise them lifestyle modifications and we observe them for a period of 3 to 6 months. If BP is not controlled, we start them on drug treatment. For patients who are grade 2 hypertensive, we advise them lifestyle modification and we start drug treatment and aim for blood pressure control within 3 months. Same as for the patients with grade 3 hypertension, we advise lifestyle modification
Dr.
and start.
Abhinav?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you elaborate on what lifestyle modifications you will speak about to the patient?
Ma'am, weight reduction, decrease in salt intake, exercising, eating green leafy vegetables and fruits, and decreasing, avoid smoking, avoid alcohol.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is
exercising,
DASH diet, which
DASH diet. So DASH
Yes.
diet mentions that we should decrease our salt intake to less than 6. We should exercise for a 30-minute period, and we should have green leafy vegetables and fruits, and
lots of fruits.
Lots of fruits.
Lots of fruits. Yes.
Yes, sir.
So the lifestyle advice, like it could be for primary prevention, but there is something like primordial prevention. Like patient is healthy, even then we suggest all these things, So
Yes,
they
sir.
should be told very aggressively to this individual. 50% of the hypertensive would become diabetic at some stage in their future career. So it will help for many things.
Yes, sir.
Abhinav, you said grade 2 hypertension, lifestyle modification, and drug treatment. Which
Yes,
drugs would you advise as a first line of treatment?
sir.
In grade 2.
According to the European Society guidelines, they want us to start with a two regimen therapy in a single pill combination, and we monitor BP and aim for blood pressure control for 3 months. So we start for ACE or ARB, that is ACE, RAS blockers, RAS system blockers, and with a calcium channel blocker or a diuretic in a single pill combination.
Yeah, the beta blocker used to be the first line of treatment once upon a time, but these things have changed over last 5-6 years, I think.
Yes, sir.
Because beta blockers do not reduce cardiovascular risk to that extent.
Yes, sir. ALHA trial mentions.
The central aortic pressure also.
Yes, sir. So in fit older patients with hypertension more than 80 years, blood pressure lowering treatment and intervention are recommended when systolic blood pressure is more than 160. For patients aged 65 to 80 years, when systolic blood pressure is in grade 1 range, BP lowering treatment and lifestyle interventions are recommended. Antihypertensive treatment may also be considered in frail older patients if tolerated. Withdrawal of BP lowering drug treatment on the basis of age is not recommended. In patients with high normal BP, lifestyle changes are recommended and drug treatment must be considered. Lifestyle modifications. We need
this elderly people,
yes,
when we give them antihypertensive, systolic is the target, but we should not drop diastolic to less than 65. If while coming down on systolic, if your diastolic is going to go less than 65, the coronary perfusion suffers. Many of these elderly may be never tested for coronary artery disease. So at 80, 85, I would imagine many of them would be carrying hidden coronary artery disease. So drop in diastolic pressure less than 65 could precipitate angina. So be very careful. So, and you must take lying down and standing blood pressure in these individuals.
Yes. See, basically, Abhinav, there are two schools of thought, and the American Heart Association in the last recommendation in 2019 did not recognize isolated systolic hypertension as a different entity. They said, irrespective of the age, the target blood pressure should be 130 or 80. The European Society recognizes this as a as a different entity, but the recommendation for target is slightly higher in European Society, which is 140 or 80. So what Dr. Hiremat is saying is right, and we should not lower it too aggressively because you can get some other complications with that.
Yes. Very true that European Society is a little bit liberal, more for systolic targets.
Okay, go ahead.
So what are lifestyle modifications we need to follow? Salt restriction, moderate alcohol consumption, high consumption of vegetables and fruits, weight reduction, maintaining ideal body weight, regular physical activity, and smoking cessation.
What is moderate alcohol consumption? Can you elaborate on that?
Sir, 2 drinks per day.
I also want you to elaborate on salt restriction because this is something which is not very well understood by many of us.
Sir, for salt restriction, according to the DASH diet, we should restrict our salt from 4 to 6 grams per day. 4 to 6. And for alcohol consumption, for men, it is...
in terms of, like somebody told me, a pinch of salt is 3 grams. 3 grams.
2 to 3 grams.
So if you are saying between 2 and 4, only this much is allowed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, alcohol.
Shirish, what is the correct figure? Because various people quote various amounts of salt. Some say 3, some say 5. What is the correct figure actually?
Actually, I would make a clear difference between elderly hypertensive and young age hypertensive. Elderly are salt sensitive. That means if you control salt, the blood pressure can be more effectively controlled or come down. In elderly, we like to use calcium blockers and diuretics as two important antihypertensive. So salt sensitivity is the reason why they respond very quickly to diuretics. So this is one group where I think we must consider restricting salt.
Because probably the pathophysiology in elderly and younger patients is totally different. The genesis of hypertension is probably different. This is more in younger patients, more RAS dependent, and this is more atherosclerotic dependent, I think, to do with the elasticity of the arterial system.
Dr. Hiremat and Dr. Gadkari, if you start a patient on antihypertensive medicines, does any of the medicine have a selective effect more on systolic or more on diastolic, or is it all the same?
No, I mean, if you're talking about calcium antagonists, they're more effective in systolic hypertension.
Yes.
Diuretics are more effective in systolic hypertension, as opposed to beta blockers and I mean your ARBs, ACE inhibitors are more for diastolic, as effective in diastolic. So you have to basically see which hypertension you are treating. And as MSH has said, elderly and younger patients probably behave differently.
So this is exactly translates into clinical practice, where we treat elderly with calcium blockers and diuretics in preference, while in younger individuals, somebody who is 50 and around, with ARB, and if somebody is young, see, you cannot sort of totally disregard beta blockers. People who are 40 years and who have a high sympathetic drive, like if you see them once, their pulse rate is 100, and you know they are all anxious kind of individuals, achievers as we call them, and they are the ones who would respond to beta blockers very importantly. So they are the one, that is a strong group where I would still use beta blockers. Maybe number 2, I mean ARB number 1 and beta blockers number 2.
Sir, for alcohol consumption, they mentioned that a standard drink contains 14 gram ethanol. So 2 drinks for men per day and 1 drink for women per day.
Okay.
Per day?
Per day. That's quite okay.
Quite okay means he's very liberal, I thought, you know.
Very encouraging, especially in today's situation.
Does it have any bearing to percentage of alcohol?
No, you don't.
Sir, one standard drink contains 14 grams, sir. Percentages according to
percentage is usually around 40. Spirits will be around 40%.
40%, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Treatment algorithm for hypertension. Initiation of treatment in most patients with a single pill combination comprising of 2 drugs to improve the speed, efficiency, and predictability of blood pressure control. Preferred 2-drug combination are as RAS blocker with a calcium channel blocker or a diuretic. Beta blocker combination with a diuretic or any drug from the other major classes is an alternative when there is a specific indication for a beta blocker, such as angina, post-myocardial infarction, heart failure, or for heart rate control. For low-risk patients with stage 1 hypertension, whose systolic blood pressure is less than 150, or very high-risk patients with high normal BP or frail older patients. Use of 3-drug single pill combination comprising of a RAS blocker, calcium channel blocker, and a diuretic if BP is not controlled by a 2-drug combination. Addition of spironolactone for the treatment of drug-resistant hypertension. Use of other classes of antihypertensive in...
No, we know at this stage we must define what is resistant hypertension.
More than 3 drugs.
Yes, sir.
One of them has to be a diuretic. One has to be a diuretic, other two can be anything,
Diuretic
and you are still not
yes,
at
sir.
target. That is called a resistant hypertension.
Resistant
3 or more
And
drugs.
spironolactone in clinical practice too, we have seen works extremely well. See,
Yes,
you
sir.
cannot generalize diuretic as one group. You know, we have hydrochlorothiazide, chlorthalidone,
Yes, sir.
we have indapamide, and we have
Loop.
spironolactone. So all four are different. I would feel hydrochlorothiazide is a very weak diuretic. Most of the time, it produces just a little bit of hypovolemia so that the other antihypertensive can act very strongly. But it's very low on my list. I generally use indapamide. Indapamide is not a true diuretic. It has a lot of vascular action, and that's why you never get diuresis as such, but you get a good hypotensive action when combined with other antihypertensive.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
device-based hypertension treatment, carotid-based stimulation or baroreflex amplification therapy, externally via implantable pulse generator or internally via implantable device designed to increase the strain on carotid bulb, can lower blood pressure in patients with resistant hypertension. The GEAR project. Acute elevations in blood pressure, usually defined as more than 180 systolic and 110 diastolic, associated with an acute organ damage, is defined as hypertensive emergency. If same amount of blood pressure elevation, maybe with an absence of end organ damage, is defined as the term hypertensive urgency or uncontrolled hypertension. The GEAR project was proposed as a survey aimed to evaluate the awareness, diagnosis, and treatment of hypertensive emergencies and hypertensive urgencies in Italy. A questionnaire was prepared by young investigators in Italian society before the release of 2018 ESC guidelines. They found out that in hypertensive urgencies, a favorable prognosis has been reported, while the occurrence of cardiovascular events went up to 23% in first year. Oral drug admission was advised and with strict control and follow-up rather than for hypertensive urgency patients.
I think
Hypertensive
before we sort of progress to treat somebody with 2 drugs and 4 drugs and so on, you must necessarily exclude causes of secondary hypertension. So
Yes, sir.
only this, I've seen 65-year-old diagnosed for the first time with coarctation of aorta at that stage and was on host of antihypertensive medication. So this is something which is missed in clinical practice, and you have to be very careful. Echo is extremely useful. So an echographer, when you're doing a simple echo for a hypertensive patient, must always put a probe in the suprasternal notch and check at the descending aorta. Very simple thing to do. It's about 10 seconds, but could be beneficial for lifetime to these individuals.
Yes, sir. Hypertensive emergencies. Hypertensive emergencies are situations in which severe hypertension, grade 3, is associated with acute hypertension-mediated organ damage, which is often life-threatening and requires immediate but careful intervention to lower blood pressure, usually with intravenous therapy. Test we need to do to evaluate end organ damage, that is fundoscopy, 12-lead ECG, hemoglobin, platelet count, fibrinogen, creatinine, GFR, electrolytes, LDH, haptoglobin, urine creatinine to albumin to creatinine ratio, urine microscopy for red cells, leukocytes, pregnancy test in women of childbearing age, specific tests by indication for troponin CKMD, chest X-ray, echocardiography, CT angiography of thorax and abdomen, CT or MRI brain, renal ultrasound, and urine drug screen. Patients who are having malignant with or without renal failure, we should reduce the mean arterial pressure by 20 to 25%, and the first line of treatment is labetalol and nicardipine. Patients, those who are having hypertensive encephalopathy, we should immediately reduce the mean arterial pressure by 20 to 25%. First line of treatment being labetalol and nicardipine. For any acute coronary event, we should reduce the systolic blood pressure to less than 140, and first line of treatment being labetalol and nitroglycerin. For any acute cardiogenic pulmonary edema, we should reduce the systolic blood pressure by less than 140 and start with nitroprusside or nitroglycerin. For patients who are we suspect with aortic dissection, we should reduce the systolic blood pressure to less than 120 and heart rate to less than 60. And we can start them on esmolol and nitroprusside or nitroglycerin. For patients who are diagnosed with eclampsia or severe preeclampsia, we should reduce the systolic blood pressure to less than 160 and diastolic to less than 105. And we can start them on labetalol or nicardipine and magnesium sulfate. Thank you.
I want to open up the discussion, and all the residents who are logged in, please feel free to ask questions either to Abhinav or to Dr. Gadkari or Dr. Hiremat, because it's important that you ask questions and clear your doubts. Nothing is silly, just ask questions what you feel is required.
So first to Abhinav, if you can't answer, then to Milind and then to me. Because I think Abhinav is the best read today, you know. So
yeah.
So please do ask questions. So you can unmute yourself and ask questions, or I'm unmuting everybody.
So can I ask a question, Abhinav?
Yes, sir.
So this very difficult to control blood pressure, sometimes we see in chronic kidney disease, and it's not a sort of a totally dysfunctional kidney. You know? Patient is up and about. Creatinine is probably around 2, GFR maybe between 45 and 60. And the conventional treatment doesn't help. If you see the nephrologist's prescription, there are generally lots and lots of medication in dosages which we never use. I mean, we generally like to limit metoprolol to 100 milligram, but they use 200 milligram very quickly, very easily. So is there a sort of a preference? Like say, we have a calcium blocker and we have about 3-4 calcium blockers available to us.
Yes, sir.
So how do you make a switch? I mean, we have the newer ones, cilnidipine and benidipine. Both came some advantage over nifedipine. Nifedipine's big disadvantage is the pedal edema. But I would still strongly feel that retard preparation is a very effective antihypertensive medication. Milind, maybe you could.
I think nifedipine retard is coming back in a strong way because there is some evidence that this is controls the blood pressure, especially the conditions which you described, so-called resistant and difficult cases to control. We at KEM, we have a lot of experience with these chronic renal failure patients because we've got a very good kidney unit. And Dr. Loba and I usually prefer to use a lot of centrally acting drugs like clonidine, and I mean clonidine used to be used, but now we use more of moxidine, and that is very effective in these patients. And we usually go up to 0.3 twice a day or even thrice a day. So that's the maximum dose we can use.
I just want to extend this question.
Plus, obviously, calcium antagonists and maybe a beta blocker, because most of them we cannot use ARBs and ACE inhibitors for obvious reasons. But if they are on regular dialysis, even those drugs can be used.
Okay, let me
the problem
ask,
with potassium always remains.
So can I ask
Sanjay, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
When you write these antihypertensives, many times what happens is a patient comes to my clinic in the evening, say around 7 p.m. I check his blood pressure, it is around 160/90. And when I check with him, he says, I have taken my telmisartan with hydrochlorothiazide in the morning. So how long is the duration of action for all these, which is, how do you titrate that? So, how long does the action last?
Actually,
because
both
many times the telmisartan patient who comes in the evening, his BP is 160/90. So is he under controlled or is it wearing off effect?
No, he's not under control.
Okay.
The telmisartan, the duration is good, like you can expect 24 hours control, both with telmisartan and hydrochlorothiazide. But if you are eating blood pressure reading, most of these, any tablet for that matter, you take in the morning, after about 12 hours, it's not a truly 24 hours tablet. After 12 hours, it starts going down.
Yeah.
If the reduced bioavailability is still able to control, well and good, you could continue with an OD dose. But since your blood pressure is 160, that means but towards evening it is not under well control. In that case, you need something additional in the evening. So if you are going to use two separate drug combinations, always use one in the morning and one in the evening, so that as the tablet effect is weaning off, the next one kicks in and overall gives you a good 24 hours control.
Yeah, I believe in this strategy because I don't think if you read pharmacologic books, a lot of drugs will be available for 24 hours. But I don't think in practice this really.
But you know, Milind, the competition is from the adherence. If you give a triple drug combination once in the morning, the patient's acceptance is far better than giving them two tablets, especially somebody who is 50, traveling all the time. He would probably say, oh, give me just one tablet. So there, it is better to accept this kind of adherence than to push in twice a day or thrice a day.
I just have one question that, I mean, we talked about chronic kidney disease, and we know that suppose somebody's come with, let's say, grade 2 or grade 3 CKD with gross proteinuria, and first goes to Abhinav and then, of course, to the experts. What would your choice of agents be? Because we know that the quantum of proteinuria is directly proportional to the worsening of the GFR. And in these sort of situations, when you've got gross proteinuria, you need to not only focus on progression of the kidney disease, but also bring the proteinuria down. So what would be a choice of agents be, Abhinav, under the situation, and you know, how would you use those drugs effectively?
Most difficult question to answer.
So Abhinav, do you have the answer?
You have put Abhinav in a tight spot.
I know, Abhinav, we already give you 80% marks.
Sir, we can start them on ACE inhibitors.
Yeah.
And because it will help in to control the blood pressure as well as to bring down the proteinuria. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Obvious choice will be ACE or ARB basically because of proteinuria. It will all depend on what the creatinine is basically.
So I said in stage 2, stage 3, and let's suppose your ACR is not working. Then what is the next choice?
Sir, we can add a calcium channel blocker to it.
Which one?
Sir,
these would be sort of difficult to control blood pressure. So ACE, ARB, accepted. Let's jump. Between ACE and ARB, do we make a difference? Milind, I think since you have a lot of experience treating so many kidney patients.
I prefer ARBs in hypertension patients. Usually.
I think the drop in blood pressure is clearly better with
ARB.
Yes.
ACE is more for modulation and post-MI cases, sort of LV remodeling and things. So that ACE is reserved for that, I think.
Two things. That most of the recommendations say that if you should use ARBs only in ACE intolerant patients. So are you going to make a deviation from the guideline in that case?
Clearly. I mean, what is more important? Drop in blood pressure. Digits are very important. Once you get the digits, then you can argue which is a better drug to get to those low digits. So here, the kind of case you're describing, I don't think it can be controlled with ACE inhibitors. So there definitely ARB would be important.
Sanjay, the dose you require to control high blood pressure or resistant hypertension with ACE is very, very high. Sometimes, I mean, which definitely causes a lot of side effects. So I think ARBs in these sort of situations are slightly better molecule to molecule. That is my personal thing.
In many other fields, there is talk about personal medicine and how you tailor treatment chemotherapy and so on in our field also. So is there any personalized medicine in hypertension to like decide which patient gets what? I mean, like you are discussing, there are various other issues, diabetes and so on and so forth.
I think you clearly make a difference between elderly and average age. For elderly, no question that calcium blockers are the best, but diuretics is probably the next best thing to do. It could even be reversed, like somebody is just mildly hypertensive, I would use only a diuretics, because calcium blockers are generally more potent hypotensive agents compared to, and these elderlies, they get up at night for loo, and they fall and fracture and so many issues. So be very careful in bringing down their blood pressures because they will definitely have postural hypertension. So similarly, we discussed for a younger age individual, I would use ARB as ARB or ACE for that matter as first choice. If he's high sympathetic drive, like tachycardia, then beta blockers.
But another caution that you need to have with the elderly is that you need to monitor their sodium levels very carefully.
Yes.
Because with the diuretic use, they have electrolyte abnormalities, and sometimes they may just come with altered sensorium, and that's where you've got to be very, very judicious that you're monitoring their sodium levels.
This is especially with chlorthalidone.
CTD.
We don't see it so much with hydrochlorothiazide or indapamide. But we definitely see this with chlorthalidone. Though, of course, the general recommendation is chlorthalidone is far ahead of hydrochlorothiazide because the duration is very good. Action lasts 24 hours compared to hydrochlorothiazide. It's a stronger action. And it has clearly shown benefits with organ damage.
I think maybe last year's AHA meeting, I think indapamide was highlighted as a very good drug for elderly hypertension.
The other thing that if you get postural drop, you should be careful that the patient is not dehydrated, because that's one of the things that you always need to be careful in orthostatic hypertension, that if you've given them and fluid, there's a lot of urination and they tend to have dehydration, they may come to you with postural hypertension and may get totally missed out. So anybody who's complaining of postural giddiness, make sure that the hydrations are adequate.
I think the resident should ask questions. There is no question from the resident.
So there are two typed questions I'm going to ask, which has come from the resident. They have been putting on the chat. So we have answered some of them. So one question is, in which patients we have to advise 24 ambulatory BP monitoring? So quick answer to that, Abhinav.
Sir, patients who are having masked hypertension as in they're out of office BP measurement is normal, but their home BP measurement is high. So in these patients, we advise ambulatory BP blood pressure measurement, that is 24-hour blood pressure measurement.
Any other indication other than mass hypertension?
As I mentioned, if you have LVH on echo or an ECG and office readings are consistently coming normal, like in that case also you need to do ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. But ambulatory blood pressure monitoring is a very boring thing. You do it once, patient will never agree to do it again, second time, because it keeps troubling him throughout the day and night, and he's very uncomfortable with this. So pick up correct patients, because I think I would use it more for diagnosis of hypertension. I mean, whether somebody needs treatment, that is one area which is very strong for ambulatory blood pressure. I think blood pressure, whether it is effectively controlled or no, I think there are many other ways to decide. But always encourage home monitoring of blood pressure. I think anyway, what you and I do these days in the office is make the patient sit, tie the blood pressure cuff, leave him alone, come back after a little while and see the readings on this. This is what they did in Sprint. Sprint was a very enclosed room, nice music, patient most relaxed, left alone. So there was no pretty nurse checking your blood pressure. So that was considered to be a true blood pressure, and that's why sprint blood pressure reading and the conventional office blood pressure reading, there is a 10 degrees difference, which many people like to accept, many experts like to accept.
I'll put this again to Abhinav and then to the experts. When you say of home blood pressure monitoring, what is the correct time that you need to really do the home blood pressure monitoring? Because patients do ask you that how often or when should we really be doing the home blood pressure monitoring?
So, if we follow the guidelines, it mentions that nighttime blood pressure measurements are more specific, and they tell about cardiac. Tell about cardiac risk factors more. So if we evaluate for, we can also take an average of home blood pressure measurements. Average reading of
the recommendation is you should do it twice a day, morning and evening, usually at the same time, and take an average.
Why not just tell them to keep changing the time? I mean, we are after all trying to get close to an ambulatory blood pressure monitoring by doing a home monitoring. And there are so many elderly who have nothing to do, and they're very interested in taking those readings, write down every 1 hour how is the blood pressure and so on. So I think instead of giving them one very time, tell them to check it at a different times, maybe just 2 times a day or 3 times a day.
Okay. The next question is, can we use diuretics as antihypertensives in pregnancy?
Yes.
Sir, we actually prefer labetalol, methyl dopa, and for pregnancy only. We don't use diuretics.
And calcium channel blocker. I forgot
Calcium channel blockers.
What happens if you give diuretics?
Amniotic fluid.
Yes, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, any of the residents want to answer that?
No.
Milind or Shirish?
Well, I'm a resident as far as hypertension goes.
I don't think there's an absolute contraindication for diuretics in pregnancy. ACE inhibitors, okay. I mean, they're not recommended. But diuretics, we give diuretics in rheumatic heart disease patients with pregnancy.
Yeah.
I don't think there should be a absolute contraindication.
Especially after
to the amniotic fluid volume.
Sorry?
No.
Does it cause a difference to the amniotic fluid volume?
No. I think
I
after 6 months, that's third trimester I'm talking, you can definitely use diuretics safely.
Okay. The next question is from Chandana. Which is the best time to give medicine if you're giving a single pill, especially in case of nocturnal dipping? So do you give morning or evening your antihypertensives as a choice?
So nocturnal dipping is diagnosed on ambulatory pressure monitoring, I guess.
Yes, assuming that
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think if there is a big difference in daytime blood pressure and nighttime blood pressure, better not to give a single pill. Try and split it because nocturnal dip could lead to a hypotensive episode, and in an elderly it could be postural hypertension 1, and they could have asymptomatic carotid narrowing, and they could with a drop they could get a stroke. So that is something which you should worry about. Okay, so split in elderly, don't give single dose, give a split dose.
I'm just going to take one last question. That patients who have loss of nocturnal dipping, can you induce artificially nocturnal dipping by whatever medications you can? And how would you do it if you have to choose your medications?
I mean, the same thing. We have what MSH is saying, that you split the dose and give the evening dose also. Instead of giving only a morning pill, split the dose into 2 and give one in the evening. So that will take care of the
But will it bring back your nocturnal dipping?
No. Let's accept that nocturnal dipping is expected, and if it fails, we are trying to go more aggressive on antihypertensive.
Yeah.
Are these antihypertensive drugs under price control and out of interest? Which is the most expensive? Which is available?
Most of them, except the very newer calcium antagonists, most of them are under price control. Not very expensive.
I mean, if you compare antihypertensive with other cardiac drugs, they are really not expensive.
Not expensive.
Okay, I'm going to end up now. We've run out of time.
Yeah.
I would like to thank Abhinav for an excellent presentation. I think you did a great job. And I would like to thank all our experts.
Sanjay, I must tell you, I've never accepted an invitation where I'm invited 4 hours before and say, "Oh, can you join?" Only for you that I've come in.
Thank you, Shirish. Thank you, Milind. Appreciate
you should Sanjay, you should thank the coronavirus, because otherwise MS would be in this clinic.
You must be working in his labs.
or you are doing a PAMI.
Dr. Agarwal?
Or a CTO.
All right, but we enjoyed talking with the
really
young crowd, and I'm sure. See, hypertension is something which I think has to be individualized, like many other conditions.
I think there is one question we have got. Okay, please go ahead and ask.
Sir, any disadvantage of initiation of this AC inhibitor in this COVID-19 outbreak? Because this virus enters in the type 2 pneumocyte with through SC2 receptor.
Yeah, there was a controversy, but I think the American Heart has put that at rest. I think they came out with some.
Yes. I think ESC has cleared
yes, European Society has come out with not a paper, but advisory that it is not that strong an association.
Yeah. So it was primarily to show that whether ACE2s, they have shown a dual relationship of protection as well as worsening. But there's no conclusive evidence.
No conclusive evidence.
Because what the ACE2 does, it facilitates the virus entry. And that's how that is important. But it also
basically, the European Society has said you do not change the treatment for this epidemic.
So you don't continue the ACRBs.
Yeah.
I mean, we couldn't have ended this webinar without talking about Corona, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Abhinav, congratulations for that.
Very nice presentation.
Nice presentation.
Thank you.